Welcome back. If you are here, it means you are still searching for truth in a world built on lies. This is the complete story of what happened to every country on Earth when the bombs fell. Every nation, every people, every place that once had a name. Gone. You think you know the Great War. You know America burned. You know China fired first. But what happened to Europe, to Africa, to the Soviet Union, to India, to the islands scattered across empty oceans? What happened to the billions who died in places no one remembers? This video covers all of it. The complete global picture of how humanity destroyed itself. The truth they did not want you to know. Because acknowledging it means accepting that nowhere was safe. Nowhere escaped. Everyone lost. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. I am not here for numbers. I am here because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to bear witness. If that matters to you, then welcome. You are exactly where you need to be. They told us it was just 2 hours. 2 hours to end the world. But that is a lie we tell ourselves to make it bearable, to compress the horror into something the human mind can process without shattering completely. The truth is, the world died over decades, piece by piece, nation by nation, bleeding out slowly before anyone even realized the patient was terminal. I need you to understand something before I go any further. What I am about to tell you is not speculation. This is not some wasteland campfire tale meant to scare children into staying close to the settlement walls. I have spent years piecing this together from pre-war terminals, from the few ghouls old enough to remember, from classified documents that should have stayed buried in government bunkers. I know what happened to every country on this planet, and I know why we never talk about it. The world did not end on October 23rd, 2077. That was merely the day we stopped pretending otherwise. Let me start with a question. Do you know what the resource wars were? Not the sanitized version they fed to schoolchildren in those final years, but the real answer. It was not a war. It was the death throes of civilization cannibalizing itself. And it started in 2051 when the United States looked south at Mexico and decided that political stability and pollution were convenient excuses to take what they wanted. They imposed sanctions. They strangled the Mexican economy. Then they invaded and occupied the oil fields, keeping the refineries running and the petroleum flowing north, while Mexico paid the price in blood and sovereignty. That same playbook repeated across Europe. When Middle Eastern countries raised oil prices in 2052 because they finally realized their reserves were finite, the European Commonwealth responded with military action. They invaded. A long drawn-out war began, and with it, the slow unraveling of international order. The United Nations tried to hold things together, but by July of 2052, after heated debates and mass withdrawals, it disbanded. The one global institution meant to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe simply ceased to exist. Then, in December of 2053, Tel Aviv disappeared. A terrorist nuclear weapon, they said. The first use of atomic fire since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was supposed to be a wake-up call. Instead, it was a preview. By January 2054, limited nuclear exchanges were happening across the Middle East. Small yields, they reassured us. Tactical strikes, as if there is anything tactical about splitting atoms to vaporize cities. But here is what they never told you. The war between Europe and the Middle East did not end because diplomacy prevailed or because cooler heads won out. It ended in 2060 because the oil fields ran dry. There was nothing left to fight over. Both sides were reduced to ruin, economies shattered, populations decimated. And for what? For the last dregs of petroleum that humanity had already burned through its reserves to fight over. The European Commonwealth dissolved shortly after, not with any grand declaration but through simple collapse. Nations withdrew, bickering and quarreling like rabid dogs over the remaining scraps. The great European experiment, the union that was supposed to prevent another world war, died not from nuclear fire, but from its own desperate, self-inflicted wounds. When the bombs finally fell in '77, Europe was already a graveyard. They just had not buried the bodies yet. You want to know what happened to Europe after the Great War? Imagine a corpse that someone decided to shoot just to make sure it was dead. That is Europe. The Middle East was even worse, transformed into an irradiated wasteland before most Americans even knew where to find it on a map. Whatever survived there, we will never know, because nothing has come out of that region since. No traders, no refugees, nothing. But let me tell you about the country everyone forgets. Canada. Sweet, polite Canada, America's neighbor to the north. Do you know what we did to them? We annexed them, not in a single day, but gradually, a slow-motion invasion dressed up as logistics and national security. During the Sino-American War, the United States needed Canadian resources, timber for fortifications, minerals for power armor, oil reserves, so we took them. Acre by acre, forest by forest, mountain by mountain. The Canadians protested, of course. They rioted. They tried to ban American and Chinese forces from fighting on their soil. Nobody listened. We called them Little America, like it was a term of endearment and not an admission of colonial theft. Towns caught between American and Chinese forces were reduced to rubble. When the Great War came, whatever was left of Canada that had not already been strip-mined and bombed during the resource wars got hit by the nuclear exchange. There are rumors, whispers really, of safe havens deep in the Canadian wilderness, places the bombs somehow missed. But rumors are all they are. Nobody who has gone looking has come back to confirm. Now let us talk about China, the People's Republic, the other half of the equation that destroyed the world. They invaded Alaska in 2066, desperate for resources, for oil, for anything that could keep their civilization from collapsing. The Sino-American War raged for over a decade. American forces, equipped with power armor, pushed them into a stalemate. Both sides bled, both sides suffered. By 2077, American troops had liberated Anchorage and even invaded mainland China. We were winning, or so they told us. China launched first. That much we know now, though it was debated for years. They fired nuclear missiles at the American mainland, a desperate act by a nation with its back against the wall. The United States detected the launches at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. 17 minutes later, the president ordered a retaliatory strike. By 9:42, Pennsylvania and New York were already gone. Washington, D.C. followed 5 minutes after that. And China? China ceased to exist as a nation within those same 2 hours. American retaliation was total. The nuclear exchange was believed to have kicked China back into the Stone Age, if that. Their cities, densely packed and clustered together, made perfect targets. Hundreds of millions died instantly. The ones who survived the initial blasts faced something worse. Radiation, starvation, the complete collapse of everything that makes a society function. There is a Chinese submarine off the coast of Boston. Did you know that? The Yangtze. Its captain is still there, a ghoul now, preserved by radiation. His name is Zhao. He does not even know if his country fired first. He just knows he followed orders and launched missiles at American cities, and now he sits in that metal tomb, unable to die, unable to forget. At least he feels remorse. That is more than most can say. But China was not the only communist power. The Soviet Union was still around, though diminished, eclipsed by China as America's primary enemy. In the fallout timeline, the USSR never collapsed in 1991. It limped along into the 21st century, maintaining consulates, maintaining diplomatic relations with the United States, even as Cold War propaganda painted them as the enemy. There was even a Soviet diplomat in Los Angeles, whose granddaughter ended up in Vault 13. What happened to the Soviet Union when the bombs fell? We do not know for certain. They are mentioned in passing in defense simulations, in contingency plans. They likely had their own nuclear arsenal, their own targets painted on them by both America and China. The consensus among those who study these things is that Soviet territory was hit, probably hard. The steppes of Russia, the industrial centers, the military installations, all gone. Transformed into radioactive wasteland. But here is the thing that keeps me up at night. The Soviet Union had vast territory, sparse population in many regions, deep bunkers, hardened facilities. If anyone had the infrastructure to survive a nuclear exchange outside of Vault-Tech's twisted experiments, it might have been them. Yet we have heard nothing. No expeditions from the east, no traders crossing the Bering Strait. Either everyone died, or whoever survived decided the rest of the world was not worth contacting. I am not sure which possibility is more terrifying. Let me tell you what happened to Mexico, because it encapsulates the casual cruelty of how the world died. Mexico City was hit by nuclear weapons during the Great War. Not as thoroughly as Washington, D.C., but enough to turn it into a radioactive crater. The city that had survived for centuries, that had endured conquest and earthquake and everything history could throw at it, was vaporized in an instant. But Mexico's real tragedy started decades earlier. In 2051, when the United States invaded to secure oil interests. American energy companies, led by Poseidon Energy, controlled the Chicontepec oil fields across Veracruz, Hidalgo, and Puebla. They extracted everything of value while Mexico paid the price. When the bombs fell, they did not just destroy a country. They destroyed a nation that had already been hollowed out, bled dry by its northern neighbor, left with nothing but the promise that at least the suffering would end. The rest of Latin America, South America, we know almost nothing concrete, and that silence is its own kind of answer. There are no official records, no confirmed survivors making their way north. In 2042, an earthquake hit Mexico City, and Mr. Handy robots became bestsellers for disaster cleanup. That is the most significant pre-war event we know about the region outside of US interference. When the Great War came, the nuclear powers likely had limited interest in bombing South American countries that posed no strategic threat. But here is the ugly truth. It would not have mattered. The atmospheric effects alone, the nuclear winter, the radioactive fallout carried on wind patterns, the collapse of global trade and communications, all of it meant that even countries not directly targeted would face catastrophe. Starvation as crops failed, radiation sickness from fallout, the breakdown of society as resources vanished and desperate people did desperate things. South America may not have been bombed into oblivion, but it died all the same, slowly and agonizingly. What do you think really happened there? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I would like to know if I am the only one who feels this way. Africa. Let us talk about Africa, because the silence surrounding that continent is deafening in a way that makes my skin crawl. There is no official law, no terminal entries, no ghoul testimonies about what happened to Africa when the bombs fell. Just absence, just a void where an entire continent should be. Think about what that means for a moment. Africa in the 21st century, even in the fallout timeline, was not some isolated backwater. Nigeria had oil, Egypt had oil. South Africa was a nuclear power until 1994 in our timeline, and who knows what path they took in the divergent fallout world. When the resource wars began, when every drop of petroleum became worth more than human life, do you honestly believe the major powers ignored African reserves? I have a theory, and it keeps me awake some nights. Africa was not ignored during the Great War. Africa was fought over before the Great War, torn apart during the resource wars when Europe and the Middle East were bleeding each other dry. We know smaller nations went bankrupt as oil prices skyrocketed. We know the European Commonwealth was desperate enough to invade the Middle East. You think they stopped at Middle Eastern borders? You think they did not push into North Africa, into the oil-producing regions, into anywhere that might have resources they could extract? By the time the nuclear exchange happened, Africa may have already been a war zone, destabilized by foreign intervention, carved up by powers that saw it only as a resource depot. And when the bombs fell, when the nuclear winter set in, when global trade and communication collapsed, an entire continent simply vanished from human knowledge. No survivors made it to North America. No expeditions returned. Nothing. Or perhaps something worse. Perhaps there are survivors. Perhaps there are entire civilizations rebuilding in Africa right now. And they looked at what happened to the rest of the world and decided isolation was the only sane response. Perhaps they are watching the wasteland from a distance and learning from our mistakes. Perhaps they want nothing to do with the nations that destroyed themselves and nearly took the planet with them. Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands. These places existed, we know they did. Watauga High School in West Virginia had a field trip planned to Japan before the war. The Yakuza, the Japanese criminal organization, had descendants operating around New Reno in the post-war wasteland, maintaining their traditions of swordplay and throwing weapons. That means some cultural continuity survived somehow across the Pacific. But what happened to Japan itself? The country that had already been nuclear bombed twice in World War II, that knew better than anyone what atomic weapons could do. We have no answers, only implications. Only the knowledge that when the Great War came, it was called great for a reason. It was global. Spears of nuclear fire rained from the skies everywhere. Australia was likely hit, at least the populated centres. Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, strategic targets, military installations. But Australia is vast, with remote regions that might have escaped direct strikes. The Northern Territory, the Outback, Tasmania. These areas could theoretically have pockets of survivors, though they would face the same challenges as everywhere else. Radiation, nuclear winter, the collapse of supply chains, and perhaps something we have not considered. Australia's unique ecosystem was already filled with creatures that could kill you in dozens of creative ways before the bombs fell. What did radiation do to them? What horrors evolved in the isolation of that island continent? New Zealand, smaller, more isolated, might have avoided direct hits entirely. It had no strategic value in a war between the United States and China, no military installations worth targeting. But avoiding the bombs does not mean avoiding the consequences. Nuclear fallout does not respect borders or oceans. The climate change that followed the Great War, the radioactive rain that fell for 4 days straight, the death of most plant life on Earth, all of that reached even the most remote islands. Here is what we know about the immediate aftermath of the Great War. Information pulled from pre-war terminals and Ghoul accounts. The nuclear exchange lasted 2 hours. In those 2 hours, more energy was released than in all previous human conflicts in history combined. The ground buckled under the strain. Entire mountain ranges thrust up from the earth. Rivers and oceans became contaminated with radioactive fallout from the relatively low-yield weapons used by all sides. Low yield, they called them low yield. Warheads ranging from 200 to 750 kilotons. Low compared to what exactly? The biggest bombs we could build. Each one of those low-yield weapons could still obliterate a city, and there were thousands of them. Chinese submarines carried high-yield variants. American bombers delivered their payloads. Mobile missile launchers, silos, naval vessels, all contributing to the symphony of annihilation. The climate changed horrifically. That is the phrase used in the historical records. Horrifically. Once the initial dust settled, the Earth was locked in a single permanent season. Scorching radioactive desert summer everywhere. The few regions that escaped direct hits still faced the nuclear winter that followed. The sun blotted out by particulates, temperatures plummeting as the atmosphere choked on the debris of vaporized cities. Then came the rain. 4 days of radioactive precipitation, killing thousands of species that had somehow survived the initial blasts. Animals, plants, microorganisms. The foundation of the ecosystem dissolved under that poisonous deluge. By the time it stopped, the Earth was a barren wasteland. Nearly all pre-war plant life was dead, killed either by the explosions or the radiation in the fallout. Some cities maintained intact buildings despite close detonations. Washington, D.C., for example, still had recognizable structures, though the streets were blocked with rubble and radiation made them death traps. But those were the exceptions. Most places were simply erased. Mexico City became a crater. New York vanished in the opening minutes. Pennsylvania, gone. The population centers of China, with their dense clusters of humanity, became mass graves measured in the hundreds of millions. From space, if anyone had been up there to see it, Earth no longer looked like Earth. The astronauts on any space stations would have watched their home planet transform into a green, smog-filled, irradiated mess. The oceans boiling in places. The continents obscured by fire and ash. Any thought of return would have been fantasy. They would have died up there, slowly, watching the world end from a front row seat they could not escape. But let us go back to the countries. Let me tell you about places that existed, that had names and borders and people, and are now just question marks on a dead world's map. India, the subcontinent with over 1 billion people, a nuclear power in its own right. Pakistan next door, another nuclear state, and the two of them had been on the brink of war multiple times even before the resource wars began. When the Great War started, when missiles were flying and early warning systems were screaming, what do you think happened? Do you think India and Pakistan just sat there and waited to see what occurred? Or do you think old hatreds and new panic led to regional exchanges? I suspect India and Pakistan nuked each other, probably in the opening hour of the Great War. Maybe sooner, maybe at the first sign of launches elsewhere. Mutually assured destruction on a subcontinental scale. 1 billion people gone. The Indus and Ganges river valleys irradiated. The cities cremated. And for what? Because humans would rather destroy their neighbors than trust them not to shoot first. Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia. This region was already familiar with war, with foreign powers using their land as battlegrounds for proxy conflicts. During the Sino-American War, China needed supply routes, needed allies, needed buffer zones. The United States needed to contain Chinese influence. You can guess what happened. The dominoes fell again, just like they had in the 20th century. But this time, when they stopped falling, there was nothing left standing. Indonesia is an archipelago, thousands of islands spread across the Pacific. Maybe some of them escaped direct strikes. Maybe survivors clung to remote atolls, fishing in radioactive waters, slowly dying from accumulated exposure. Maybe they are still out there, Tiny pockets of humanity that will never know they are not alone because there is no way to reach anyone anymore. The Middle East, we have already covered. But let me emphasize the timeline again because it matters. Tel Aviv was destroyed by a terrorist nuclear weapon in December of 2053, 24 years before the Great War. Limited nuclear exchanges were happening in the Middle East in January 2054, 23 years before the so-called end of the world. The Middle East spent over 2 decades being slowly annihilated before the Great War finished the job. That region did not die in 2 hours. It died over a generation, bleeding out while the rest of the world watched and learned nothing from the example. When October 23rd came, when the bombs fell globally, the Middle East was already an irradiated ruin. The only difference was that now it had company. Now the whole world looked like the preview the Middle East had provided. Perhaps that is the real horror. We had 20 years to see what nuclear war looked like in practice, and we did it anyway on a global scale. Britain, England, Scotland, Ireland, the United Kingdom that had ruled a quarter of the world at its height. We know people survived there because Alastair Tenpenny came from Britain to the capital Wasteland, crossing the Atlantic somehow in search of fortune or escape. Colin Moriarty came from there too, arriving in America as a child after the bombs fell. The fact that they came to America, that they saw post-nuclear United States as an improvement over where they came from, tells you everything you need to know about how bad things were in Britain. The lead designer for Fallout 3 confirmed it. Europe was worse off than America. Let that sink in. America, with its death claws and super mutants and scorched plagues and raider gangs and every other nightmare roaming the wasteland, America was the better option. Britain, with its smaller landmass, its higher population density, its proximity to the European Civil War and the fallout from Middle Eastern nuclear exchanges, had less space to hide from the bombs and fewer resources for survivors afterward. The island that had survived the Blitz, that had weathered centuries of conflict, that had built an empire spanning the globe, was reduced to something worse than the American wasteland. And if Britain was worse, what about the rest of Europe? France, Germany, Italy, Spain, all the nations that had spent the decade before the Great War tearing themselves apart over resources. The European Civil War that followed the dissolution of the Commonwealth had already wrecked the continent. When the Great War added nuclear fire to conventional warfare, it was not destruction. It was overkill. It was cremating a corpse. I want you to imagine something with me. Close your eyes if you need to, though I know you are listening in the dark already. Picture a map of the world as it was in 2077. Not the borders we memorized in school, but the reality. Picture every single country, every city, every place where humans gathered and built and loved and hoped. Now picture that map on October 22nd, less than 24 hours before the end. Tensions are at breaking point. American forces have just liberated Anchorage after years of brutal warfare. China is cornered, desperate, staring at defeat. The President of the United States has already retreated to an oil rig off the coast with his inner circle, abandoning the nation to its fate. Important government officials have vanished into hidden bunkers. Everyone who matters knows what is coming. At 3:37 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 23rd, bombers are spotted at high altitude. 3 hours earlier, suspicious submarines were identified off the California coast. Chinese stealth submarines, creeping close to deliver their payloads. One of them, the Yangtze, sat in Boston Harbor. Its captain would launch 5 of his 6 warheads, obliterating the city and everyone in it. But here is what haunts me. In those final hours, people did not believe it was real. Air raid sirens wailed across America, and people thought it was another drill, another false alarm. They had heard the warnings so many times that when the real thing came, they dismissed it. Some went to vaults. Most did not. They stayed in their homes, went about their routines, convinced that tomorrow would come just like it always had. At 9:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System confirmed 4 missile launches. The United States went to DEFCON 2. 4 minutes later, NORAD confirmed it. At 9:26, the president ordered a retaliatory strike. Scenario MXCN91. The codes were entered. The keys were turned. Thousands of missiles began their journeys. 9:42 a.m. Pennsylvania and New York are hit. The eastern seaboard lights up with atomic fire. People on the West Coast, just waking up, see the news reports for maybe 10 minutes before the missiles reach them too. At 9:47, Washington, D.C. is struck. Most American facilities go offline. The electromagnetic pulses from the detonations fry communications equipment. National Guard units mobilized the night before find themselves unable to coordinate, unable to receive orders, unable to do anything but watch as civilization burns. The exchange continues for 2 hours. Chinese missiles hit American targets, American missiles hit Chinese targets, and then, because the world was not content with bilateral annihilation, other nuclear powers joined in. The Soviet Union, seeing launches from both sides, likely fired their own arsenal rather than wait to be hit. Britain and France, what was left of them, may have done the same. Any country with nuclear weapons faced the same calculation: use them or lose them. India and Pakistan, as I said before, probably settled their old scores in those 2 hours. North and South Korea, locked in their endless standoff, finally finished what they started decades ago. Any regional conflict that had been held in check by the threat of greater powers suddenly had no reason for restraint. If the world was ending anyway, why not take your enemies with you? Israel, still reeling from Tel Aviv being vaporized 24 years earlier, sitting in a Middle East already torn apart by limited nuclear exchanges. What do you think they did when the missiles started flying? They had their own nuclear arsenal. They had enemies on every border. The calculation was simple and terrible. Better to be the one who fires than the one who waits to be hit. 7.54 billion people died. That is the official count from what records survived. 7.5 billion. But I think that number is conservative. I think it is higher, much higher, because that count only includes immediate deaths from the blasts and the initial radiation exposure. It does not count the billions who died in the days and weeks after. The ones trapped in cities with no water, no food, no medical care. The ones who succumbed to radiation sickness slowly, vomiting blood and watching their skin slough off. The ones who committed suicide rather than face what came next. It does not count the death toll from the 4 days of radioactive rain. It does not count the starvation that followed when crops failed globally. It does not count the plagues that swept through survivor populations living in filth and desperation. It does not count the violence, the murder, the cannibalism that emerged when social structures collapsed and people became animals fighting over scraps. 7.54 billion is the number of people who had the mercy of dying quickly. Let me tell you about a place almost no one remembers. Mongolia. Landlocked between Russia and China, vast and sparsely populated. In the chaos of the Great War, Mongolia probably had no strategic value. No one would waste a warhead on Ulaanbaatar when Beijing and Shanghai needed to be erased. Mongolia might have been one of the few countries to avoid direct nuclear strikes entirely. But avoiding the bombs meant nothing. The fallout from China would have drifted north on the wind. The nuclear winter would have killed the grasslands that sustained their herds. The collapse of both neighboring countries would have cut them off completely. If Mongolians survived in significant numbers, they are isolated in the center of a dead continent, surrounded by radioactive wasteland on all sides, with no way to reach anyone and no reason to try. Greenland, Iceland, the Arctic Circle, remote, frozen, seemingly worthless for strategic purposes. These places might have been spared direct hits, but the Arctic ice was already melting from climate change before the war. After the nuclear exchange, after the initial winter gave way to permanent radioactive summer, what happened to those ice caps? Did they vanish entirely? Did the sea levels rise, drowning coastal areas that had somehow survived the bombs? Did the permafrost melt, releasing methane and ancient bacteria and making an already poisoned world even more hostile to life? There are hints in the lore, little details that paint a picture if you know how to look. The oceans boiled in places from the concentration of nuclear detonations. Rivers were contaminated globally. The water cycle itself became a vector for spreading radiation. Every raindrop carried poison. Every stream and lake and aquifer was tainted. Even places that avoided direct contamination faced slow death as the water table was compromised. Some of you are wondering about the islands, the remote Pacific atolls, the Caribbean nations, places far from major population centers, far from strategic targets. Surely they escaped the worst of it, right? Surely some tropical paradise survived intact, ready to rebuild. Here is the problem. Islands depend on trade. They import food, fuel, medicine, manufactured goods. Even self-sufficient islands need things they cannot produce locally. When global shipping stopped, when every port city was either radioactive rubble or overwhelmed with refugees and chaos, the islands were cut off. They starved. They ran out of fuel for generators and fishing boats. They watched the horizon for ships that would never come, and the fallout reached them anyway. Carried on ocean currents and wind patterns, spreading like a contagion across the entire planet. The half-life of some radioactive isotopes is measured in thousands of years. The contamination from the Great War will linger until long after the last human is dead and forgotten. There is no clean place left, nowhere that escaped untouched. The Pacific Islands had another problem. Nuclear testing. Before the Great War, both the United States and other nuclear powers used remote Pacific atolls for weapons testing. Places like Bikini Atoll were already radioactive from decades of detonations. When the Great War came, it just added more poison to an already contaminated region. Any islanders who survived the initial exchange faced a slow death from accumulated exposure. Let me tell you about the places that definitely got hit. The confirmed targets we know from terminal entries and historical records. Denver, Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Diego, Dallas, Los Angeles. These were major American cities, each one a priority target for Chinese missiles. Each one is now either a crater or an uninhabitable ruin crawling with ferals and worse. But for every confirmed target, there are dozens of unknowns. What happened to Houston? To Miami? To Seattle? To Phoenix? Were they hit directly, or did they die more slowly from fallout and societal collapse? The records are incomplete, and the survivors who might remember are either dead or too far mutated to communicate clearly. Las Vegas survived relatively intact, but only because of Robert House and his missile defense system. He destroyed 68 out of 77 warheads aimed at the city. 9 still hit the surrounding area, creating the glowing sea and other radioactive dead zones. But the city itself remained standing. House had predicted the Great War with mathematical certainty, claiming it would happen within 15 years of his calculation. He was right, and his preparations saved one city while the rest of the world burned. One city out of thousands. One eccentric billionaire with the resources and foresight to build defenses. Everyone else just died. If you have ever wondered what choice you would make in a situation like this, tell me in the comments. I will be reading them. Vault-Tec knew. That much is confirmed now, from the TV series, from recovered documents, from testimony of those who were there. Vault-Tec did not just prepare for nuclear war, they had plans to ensure it happened. Barb Howard, a Vault-Tec executive, suggested at a meeting in the mid to late 2070s that they should directly instigate the apocalypse themselves. With the cooperation of corporate heads from Robco, West Tech, Repcon Aerospace, Big MT, they turned the vaults into social experiments, not shelters, experiments. Most vaults were designed to fail or to torture their inhabitants in the name of data collection. Vault 87, where supermutants were created through FEV exposure. Vault 108, with its endless cloning of a man named Gary. Vault 92, where musicians were psychologically tortured. Vault 111 with no living space, just cryochambers to freeze people indefinitely. The list goes on. Vault-Tec wanted to design a perfect post-nuclear society under their complete control. To do that, they needed the world to end. They needed data from extreme conditions. They needed to eliminate competition. And if Barb Howard's suggestion was followed through, if Vault-Tec did instigate the Great War, then every country on Earth died because some corporate executives wanted a monopoly on the future. Think about that. China may have fired first, provoked by American bioweapon research and the FEV program. The United States retaliated with overwhelming force, but behind it all, pulling strings and manipulating events, were corporations that saw nuclear apocalypse as a business opportunity. Every country, every nation, every culture and language and tradition that humanity had built over millennia, all of it sacrificed on the altar of corporate control and profit margins. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the Wasteland, hit that subscribe button. It tells me someone out there is still paying attention to warnings like these. There are places we have not discussed yet, places that exist in the gaps of the law, in the silences between confirmed facts. Central Asia, the Caucasus, the former Soviet republics that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, countries with names most Americans could not place on a map even before the bombs fell. Kazakhstan was a nuclear testing site for the Soviet Union for decades. Semipalatinsk, where over 400 nuclear tests were conducted between 1949 and 1989. The land was already poisoned before the Great War. The people were already sick from generations of exposure. When the final exchange came, when Soviet missiles launched and American retaliation reached Russian territory, did anyone even bother targeting Kazakhstan? Or was it already so contaminated that additional bombs would have been redundant? I think about the people there sometimes, the ones who survived Soviet testing, who adapted to background radiation that would kill outsiders in days, who learned to live in a poisoned land because it was the only home they had. Did that experience help them when the Great War came? Did their bodies, already damaged by decades of exposure, somehow handle the new radiation better? Or did it just mean they suffered longer before finally dying? The Caucasus region, squeezed between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, has always been a crossroads of empires and conflicts. Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan. During the resource wars, when oil became more valuable than human life, the Caspian Sea region would have been a target. Azerbaijan had oil reserves. Everyone wanted them. The fighting there probably started years before the Great War. Skirmishes and proxy wars and outright invasions. When the bombs fell, the Caucasus was probably already a war zone. The Great War just made it official, made it permanent. Southeast Europe, the Balkans, a region famous for ethnic tensions and historical grudges that never quite heal. Yugoslavia had already fractured in our timeline. Who knows what happened in the Fallout universe? But when resources became scarce, when the European Commonwealth dissolved into bickering nation-states, the Balkans would have exploded again. Old hatreds given new life by desperation and survival instinct. Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Albania. These countries tore themselves apart in the 1990s in our world. In the Fallout timeline, with the added pressure of the resource wars and the collapse of European unity, the violence would have been even worse. And then came the nuclear exchange, and it stopped mattering who hated whom, because everyone was equally dead. Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, northern countries with small populations and significant resources, hydroelectric power, forests, minerals. During the resource wars, as Europe descended into civil war, Scandinavia would have been a target. Their neutrality, if they tried to maintain it, would have meant nothing. Neutral just means you get invaded by whoever reaches you first. Finland borders Russia. When Soviet missiles launched, when the nuclear exchange began, Finland was in the blast radius. Sweden and Denmark, further west, might have had a few more minutes, might have had time to understand what was happening before the light reached them. Norway, with its Atlantic coastline, probably got hit by submarine-launched missiles from multiple directions. The midnight sun that Scandinavians celebrated every summer was replaced by the false dawn of nuclear detonations. The fjords and forests that defined those countries were either vaporized or so contaminated that nothing will grow there for thousands of years. The Vikings once explored the world from those shores. Now those shores are lifeless rock and poisoned water. Eastern Europe, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. Countries that spent decades under Soviet influence, that fought for independence and autonomy. During the resource wars, they were caught between the collapsing European Commonwealth to the west and the Soviet Union to the east. When the Great War came, they were in the crossfire. Soviet missiles headed west toward NATO targets passed over them. American missiles headed east towards Soviet territory did the same. Even if they avoided direct hits, the fallout from thousands of detonations in neighboring regions would have drifted over Eastern Europe like a toxic fog. The radiation from burning cities, the ash from vaporized populations, the poisoned rain, there was no escaping it. The Mediterranean, that ancient sea that birthed Western civilization, that connected Europe to Africa and the Middle East. Greece, Italy, Spain, North Africa, all of it contaminated. The limited nuclear exchanges in the Middle East starting in 2054 would have poisoned the Eastern Mediterranean. When the Great War came, the Western Mediterranean got its turn. Rome, the eternal city, was finally proven mortal. Athens, where democracy was born, died with the rest of the world. Istanbul, straddling Europe and Asia, probably ceased to exist in the opening minutes. The Bosporus Strait, one of the most strategic waterways on Earth, would have been a target for anyone who wanted to deny it to anyone else. And the islands, Crete, Sicily, Corsica, Cyprus, caught in the middle of conflicts they had no part in starting. Destroyed because of their geography, because they were in the way, because humans never learned to stop using islands as stepping stones for invasion. The Mediterranean Sea itself, that blue jewel that poets wrote about for millennia, turned into a radioactive soup. The fish died. The coral reefs, already stressed from centuries of human activity, were obliterated. The sea that had sustained civilizations for 5,000 years became a death trap that will remain poisonous until long. after the last story about its glory has been forgotten. Let me tell you about something that does not get discussed enough. The refugee crisis that happened in the hours and days after the bombs fell, before everyone died, before the radiation and starvation and disease took the majority of survivors. There was a brief window where people understood what had happened and tried to flee. Millions of people, maybe billions, tried to escape the cities, tried to reach areas they thought might be safer, rural regions, mountains, anywhere away from the primary targets. The roads were clogged, vehicles broke down or ran out of fuel, panic spread faster than the radiation. People trampled each other, killed each other for supplies, for transportation, for a spot in a shelter that probably would not save them anyway. The rural areas, the small towns that thought they were safe because they were not strategic targets, were overwhelmed. Thousands of desperate refugees arrived with nothing, demanding shelter and food and help. Resources that were already limited got stretched to breaking. Communities that might have survived on their own collapsed under the weight of people they could not possibly support. And the refugees carried radiation with them, contamination on their clothes and skin and in their lungs. They spread it to the places they fled to. The rural havens became just as poisoned as the cities, just more slowly. By the time people realized what was happening, it was too late to quarantine, too late to refuse entry, too late to save anyone. The borders between countries, those imaginary lines we killed each other to defend for centuries, stopped meaning anything. There was no border security, no customs, no immigration control. Everyone was a refugee. Everyone was trying to escape. And there was nowhere to go because the poison was everywhere. Some countries tried to close their borders anyway, tried to shoot refugees at the crossing points, tried to maintain order as the world ended. It did not work. You cannot stop millions of desperate people with bullets. You can kill thousands, but the rest keep coming, because staying put means certain death and moving means possible survival. The mathematics of desperation do not care about borders or sovereignty. So the guards either ran out of ammunition or gave up or were overrun. And the refugees poured across, bringing radiation and disease and chaos with them. And the countries that tried to stay isolated died alongside the ones that opened their borders. Because in the end, it made no difference. New Zealand, if you remember, I mentioned it might have avoided direct nuclear strikes. Let me tell you what I think happened there. New Zealand is isolated. 2 islands in the South Pacific, far from any strategic targets. Beautiful, sparsely populated, largely self-sufficient in food production. It should have been a survivor's paradise, right? One of the few places to escape the worst of it. But New Zealand depends on imports for fuel, for manufactured goods, for medicine. When global shipping stopped, they were cut off. And even if they avoided the bombs, the climate change that followed the Great War would have hit them hard. The nuclear winter, the disruption of ocean currents and weather patterns, the death of marine ecosystems they relied on for protein. And then there are the refugees. Australia is close. When Australia got hit, when the populated centres were destroyed, and survivors realised they were living in a contaminated wasteland, some of them would have tried to reach New Zealand, by boat by any means possible, and New Zealand would have faced an impossible choice: turn away the refugees and watch them die, or accept them and watch your own population starve under the strain. I do not know which choice they made. I do not know if New Zealand survived at all, or if it died like everywhere else, just more slowly, just with a better view. But I think about it. I think about those 2 green islands at the bottom of the world. And I wonder if anyone there is still alive, still human, still remembering what the world was before. The Pacific Islands, the dozens of nations spread across Polynesia and Melanesia and Micronesia, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands. These places were paradise once, tropical atolls with clear water and abundant fish. The kind of places people saved their whole lives to visit. They depended entirely on the outside world. Tourism, trade, aid from larger nations. When that stopped, when the ships stopped coming and the planes stopped flying and the world went silent, these islands were sentenced to slow death. Starvation, disease, the gradual realization that no help was coming because there was no one left to send it. Some of them were nuclear testing sites. The Marshall Islands, where the United States conducted dozens of thermonuclear tests. Bikini Atoll, which gave its name to swimwear before being vaporized repeatedly for weapons research. These places were already contaminated. The people had already been displaced or poisoned. The Great War just added insult to injury. And I think about the isolation. Imagine being on a remote Pacific island when the Great War happens. You see the flashes on the horizon. You hear the radio go silent. You watch the sky turn strange colors as the atmosphere fills with ash and debris. And then nothing. No word from the outside. No explanation. Just silence and the slow realization that you are alone. That everyone you knew on other islands or other continents is probably dead. That you are going to die too, but slowly, and there is nothing you can do about it. The Caribbean. Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. Islands in the Caribbean Sea, close to the United States, close to Central America. When the nuclear exchange began, submarines in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico would have been launching missiles. Some of them would have passed directly over the Caribbean, and some inevitably would have malfunctioned or been shot down, and their warheads would have detonated over the islands below. Cuba, specifically, was probably targeted directly. In our timeline, the Cuban Missile Crisis nearly started World War III. In the fallout timeline, Cuba's relationship with the Soviet Union and China would have made it a target for American missiles. Guantanamo Bay, the American naval base, would have been hit by Cuban or Soviet weapons. The entire island, already suffering from decades of embargo and isolation, would have been caught between the superpowers one final time. Haiti was the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere before the bombs fell. The Great War did not discriminate based on wealth, but poverty meant fewer resources, less infrastructure, and no ability to prepare for or respond to nuclear catastrophe. Haiti probably lost 90% of its population in the first week. The rest died more slowly. Central America: Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama. The region was already unstable before the resource wars. American intervention, communist insurgencies, drug cartels, corruption. When resources became scarce, when the United States became even more aggressive in securing its interests, Central America was occupied and stripped of anything valuable. The Panama Canal, one of the most strategic waterways on Earth, would have been fought over viciously. Whoever controlled it, controlled shipping between the Atlantic and Pacific. When the Great War came, the canal was probably one of the first targets hit. Multiple warheads to ensure it was completely destroyed, rendered unusable for anyone. There are rumors of ghoulified American soldiers still stationed at the Panama Canal, trying to return home, unable to accept that home no longer exists. I do not know if that is true, but it would be fitting, would it not? Soldiers abandoned at the edge of the world, condemned to an immortal half-life, guarding a pile of radioactive rubble because it is the only purpose they have left. I need to tell you about the ones we will never know about. The small countries, the ones without nuclear weapons or strategic value or resources anyone wanted. The ones that history forgot even before the bombs fell. Bhutan, landlocked in the Himalayas between India and China. A country that measured prosperity not in GDP but in gross national happiness. They stayed isolated, preserved their culture, avoided the worst of globalization. When the Great War came, when India and China and Pakistan were launching missiles at each other, Bhutan was in the middle. The mountains that protected them for centuries meant nothing to nuclear weapons. The fallout from hundreds of detonations in neighboring countries drifted into their valleys like fog. Their happiness index dropped to 0 along with everyone else's. Nepal, another Himalayan nation caught between giants, home to Mount Everest, the highest point on Earth, the place where humans went to prove they could conquer nature. After the Great War, Everest is still there, still standing, but now it is covered in radioactive snow and ash. The monasteries are empty. The Sherpas who guided climbers up the mountain are gone. The mountain stands as a tombstone for a species that reached its peak and then destroyed itself. Sri Lanka, an island nation off the coast of India. In our timeline, they suffered through decades of civil war. In the Fallout timeline, they probably faced similar conflicts over dwindling resources. When India launched its nuclear arsenal, when Pakistan responded, Sri Lanka was close enough to feel the heat. Close enough that the tidal waves from ocean detonations would have swept over the low-lying coasts. Close enough that there was no escape. Madagascar, off the coast of Africa. An island nation with unique wildlife found nowhere else on Earth. Lemurs and chameleons and plants that evolved in isolation for millions of years. When the Great War came, Madagascar was probably ignored by the nuclear powers. No strategic value, no resources worth fighting over. They might have avoided direct hits, but the radiation reached them anyway. The climate change killed their ecosystems. The unique species that survived for millions of years died in a generation, and the human population, cut off from the world, starved as their crops failed, and their fishing grounds died. Madagascar might have been the last place on Earth to fall, but it fell all the same. The landlocked nations of Africa, Mali, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, some of the poorest countries in the world before the bombs fell. They had nothing the nuclear powers wanted. They probably were not targeted directly, but they also had no infrastructure to respond to global catastrophe. When the climate changed, when the rain stopped falling or fell poisoned, when trade collapsed and aid stopped arriving, these countries simply ceased to exist. Not from bombs, from neglect, from being too poor to matter even in the apocalypse. I think about the children. Specifically, I think about the children who were born after the Great War. The ones who never knew the world before, who grew up in vaults or wasteland settlements or tribal communities, who learned to fear the sun because of radiation burns, who thought two-headed cows were normal, who believed the world had always been a poisonous desert where you killed or died. Those children, if they survive to adulthood, will have children of their own, and those children will have children. Generations born into hell, knowing nothing else, unable to imagine that things were ever different. The stories of the old world will become myths. The photographs and videos will seem like fairy tales. How could the sky have been blue? How could water have been clean? How could people have lived without constant fear? In a few more generations, the Great War will be origin mythology. The gods were angry and burned the world, and now we live in their punishment. The truth that it was human greed and stupidity and fear will be lost, because the truth is harder to accept than divine judgment. Every country had people who knew it was coming. Scientists, military analysts, intelligence officers. People who saw the trajectory, who understood that the resource wars could only end one way. Some of them tried to warn the public. They were ignored or silenced. Some of them built shelters, stockpiled supplies, prepared as best they could. Most of them died anyway, because you cannot prepare for the death of a planet. You can prepare for a disaster. You can prepare for a war. You cannot prepare for the systematic annihilation of every ecosystem, every food chain, every support system that makes human life possible. The preppers with their bunkers and their guns and their 5-year supply of canned food. They died too. Maybe it took them longer, but they died. Because humans are social creatures. We need communities. We need trade and cooperation and shared knowledge. Isolating yourself in a bunker just means dying alone instead of with everyone else. Vault-Tec understood this in their twisted way. That is why the vaults were social experiments. They knew that surviving the initial apocalypse was only step 1. Step 2 was surviving each other. And most vaults failed at step 2, failed spectacularly. Failed in ways that produced super mutants and psychotic residents and complete societal collapse. The few vaults that succeeded, that produced stable communities like Shady Sands and the new California Republic, did so almost by accident, despite Vault-Tec's intentions, not because of them. The triumph of human resilience over corporate malice. But for every success story, there are dozens of failures. Vaults where everyone died in the first year. Vaults where they killed each other. Vaults where the experiments drove them insane. And those were the lucky ones, the ones who at least had a chance. Most people did not make it to a vault at all. I keep coming back to the same question. Could it have been prevented? Was the Great War inevitable? Or were there off-ramps we missed? Moments where different choices could have changed the outcome? The resource wars could have been avoided if we had developed alternative energy earlier. Fusion power existed in the Fallout timeline. The technology was there, but it came too late. After the conflicts had already started, after the battle lines were drawn. If fusion had been perfected in 2040 instead of 2060, would there have been a war at all? The annexation of Canada could have been avoided. The invasion of Mexico could have been avoided. The Euro-Middle Eastern War could have been avoided. Each escalation was a choice. Each act of aggression was justified by previous acts of aggression in an endless cycle of retaliation and revenge. But I think the real point of no return was when we allowed corporations to have more power than governments. When we let Vault-Tec and Robco and Westtech and Poseidon Energy make decisions about humanity's future based on profit margins instead of survival. When we accepted that everything, including the continued existence of our species, was for sale to the highest bidder. Barb Howard suggested starting the apocalypse themselves, so Vault-Tec would be the only entity left standing. And whether they actually did it, or just created conditions where it was inevitable, the result was the same. The world ended. 7.5 billion people died, and Vault-Tec got exactly what they wanted. A monopoly on the future. Except they did not account for human adaptability. They did not account for ghouls surviving for centuries. carrying forward memory and knowledge. They did not account for communities forming outside the vaults, building something new from the ashes. They did not account for people like you, listening to this, learning from the mistakes of the past, determined not to repeat them. That is why I am telling you this, not to wallow in despair or nostalgia for a world that is gone, but because if we do not remember what happened to every country, if we do not understand how completely and totally the old world failed, we will build the new world using the same broken blueprint. The countries are gone, the borders are gone, the governments and corporations and institutions that led us to destruction are gone. What remains is us, humans, stubborn, adaptable, occasionally noble, and frequently stupid humans. We are writing the next chapter right now. Every decision we make, every community we build, every time we choose cooperation over conflict, we are deciding whether humanity gets a second chance or whether we repeat the cycle until there is nothing left to destroy. So when you think about what happened to every country in Fallout, remember this. They all made the same mistake. They all believed their survival mattered more than everyone else's. They all chose short-term gain over long-term survival. They all trusted leaders who valued power over people. And they all paid the same price. We do not have to make those mistakes again. We cannot bring back the dead. We cannot unpoison the water or unburn the forests or restore the species that went extinct. But we can choose differently. We can build something better on the ruins of what failed. Or we can fail again. The Wasteland does not care. The radiation does not care. The mutated creatures hunting in the darkness do not care. Only we care. Only we get to decide if the story ends here or continues into something worth surviving for. Every country is gone. Every nation is dust. Every flag and anthem and capital city is a memory or a crater. But humanity persists, diminished, damaged, haunted by what we lost, but still here, still trying, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, we learned something from burning down paradise. That is what happened to every country in Fallout. They died, all of them, together, in fire and poison and the complete failure of everything we thought made us civilized. The question now is not what happened to them. The question is what happens next. What do we build from the ashes? What world do we create for those children born into the wasteland who deserve better than what we left them? I do not have all the answers. No one does. But I know this. The old world ended for a reason. It was broken at a fundamental level. Broken in ways that made the Great War not just possible, but inevitable. The new world does not have to follow the same path. We can learn. We can change. We can honor the billions who died by making sure their deaths meant something. By making sure it never happens again. That is my warning. That is my testimony. That is why I needed you to hear about every country, every place, every group of humans who thought they would be the exception and discovered they were just another statistic in the greatest mass death event in history. Remember them. Remember what killed them. And for the love of whatever you hold sacred, do not let it happen again.